387 species sat in the Galactic Council chamber that night, and not one of them had gathered a quorum to stop us. That was the first thing I noticed when I walked in. The seats were full. Every delegation was present, every senior voice and arbiter and conclave representative in their designated position. The chamber was packed in the way it only ever packed for moments the history books would later describe as pivotal. And still, not one of them had signed the counterpetition. Not one had filed the procedural block. Not one had done the single bureaucratic thing that would have forced us to wait another year, another review cycle, another round of provisional status and Tier 7 seating and data chips handed out at ceremonies where our families cried and the council sent us politely to the back of the room. They had known for 6 months. 6 months of silence, and now a chamber full of witnesses. I took my seat in Tier 7. Same row I had occupied for 17 years. The chair knew the shape of me by now. I sat down and looked at the front of the chamber and did not think about that. Owen was 2 seats to my left. He had grown a beard and shaved it twice during the 6 months of filing and counterfiling and technical reviews. He was clean-shaven now. He had the look of a man who had made a decision so large it had passed through the stage of doubt and come out the other side into something quieter. Clara sat at the end of the row, already reviewing transit documents on her screen. Ned was behind us, managing the last of the paper copies. They had each done this for years alongside me, and none of them were looking at anything except what was directly in front of them. The head arbiter, Vel Rath of the Velthan Conclave, called the session to order. The translation system in my ear hummed to life, rendering his opening words in smooth, practiced English. He announced the agenda item with the particular formal flatness that senior arbiters used for proceedings they had already decided the outcome of. The Human Collective Withdrawal Petition, filed under Article 44 of the Council Charter, processed through 4 review committees and returned twice on technical grounds, was now before the full Council for final ratification. He said the words, voluntary dissolution, the way a person says the name of a neighborhood they used to live in and still haven't forgiven for something. My name was called. I stood. The hall did not go silent. It shifted. There is a particular quality of attention in a room full of beings who have already decided what an event means, who are present for the ceremony of it rather than the substance. I had experienced that quality from the receiving end many times. It landed differently from the giving end. Heavier, somehow. More focused. I had written the statement myself. For minutes and 12 seconds. My colleagues in the diplomatic corps had offered to draft something, and I had thanked them and written it myself, because I was the one who had spent 17 years in Tier 7, and I had earned those 4 minutes. I read it at a level pace. I thanked the Council for its processes. I noted, without particular emphasis, that the human delegation had submitted 47 formal development proposals over the course of membership, of which 11 had been reviewed and 3 partially adopted. I noted that in the same period, human personnel had participated in over 300 mediations, 12 active crisis interventions, and 4 treaty processes the Council's formal arbitration track had not been able to resolve on its own. I said that humanity was proud of that work and intended to continue it, on its own terms, with partners of its own choosing. I read the last sentence of the statement. Then I stopped. I did not sit down. The translation systems processed the silence for approximately 4 seconds before they registered that there was nothing to translate. Their hum became very noticeable. The chamber held its shifted attention in place, waiting. Somewhere in the 3rd row, a Crethsol elder adjusted his position on his carved platform. The Velthan delegates in the row ahead of me did not look back. They had not looked at me once since I arrived. I stood there for 2 full minutes. Nobody spoke. Not one voice from the 400 delegations. Not one point of order, not one procedural comment. The 2 minutes moved through the chamber with the weight of something that could not be taken back once it finished moving. I sat down. Owen cast our vote. His hands were steadier than mine would have been. 1 vote in favor of the withdrawal petition. 387 procedural non-votes recorded as abstentions, because a 2/3 quorum was required to block the petition, and that quorum had not been gathered. It never had been. The withdrawal was ratified. The session was adjourned. The procedural completion of everything we had spent 17 years building toward took exactly 9 minutes and 4 seconds from the moment Owen cast our vote to the moment the session formally closed. 9 minutes. We had been in that building for 17 years. I sat for a moment after the chamber began to empty. Owen put a hand on my shoulder and did not say anything. That was the right thing to do. Clara was already moving toward the exit. Ned had the documents in order. The routine of leaving a place you have spent a significant portion of your adult life working inside of, and leaving it for the last time. I had a commemorative data chip on my lapel. The council had issued one to every human delegate at the original membership ceremony in 2041. There had been a ceremony, and speeches, and our families had watched from a live feed on Earth, and there had been a great deal of emotion that everyone present had felt sincerely. The council had placed us in Tier 7 and given us data chips, and that had been the shape of things ever since. I did not look at it. I thought about it the entire walk to the transit bay. The corridor outside the chamber was cooler than the hall. The ship back to Earth was docked at Bay 12. The final phase of withdrawal paperwork would take another 4 weeks, and Owen had already begun it. There was nothing dramatic about the exit. No representative from any species stopped us at the door. No voice called after us down the corridor. The door slid shut behind us and the corridor was empty, and the transit bay was 3 levels down and the ship was waiting. I took the data chip off my lapel in the elevator. I held it in my closed hand. I put it in my pocket. We left the way we had always arrived. Quietly. Through a tier nobody had ever designed to last. 7 years is enough time to build a great deal if you stop asking for permission. We stopped asking for permission. I was in an operations office on Titan when I stopped thinking about the council every day. I cannot tell you the exact morning it happened. Recovery from a long, slow disappointment is not a single event. It is erosion. It is the gradual replacement of one fixed point of attention with many smaller ones, until one day you wake up and make coffee and read the morning reports and realize the fixed point is simply gone. The coffee was good. Real coffee, the kind that required 4 separate shipping contracts and a partnership with a station colony near Callisto that grew it in sealed agricultural bays under artificial sunlight. Getting that coffee to Titan had taken more logistical creativity than most of my early diplomatic assignments. It was worth every moment of that creativity. That detail mattered to me more than it probably should have. The Titan office was 3 rooms and a corridor. The heating had never been fully solved in the 3 years I had been working there. The window showed the amber haze of the moon's atmosphere when the external filters were functioning, and nothing at all when they were not. My assistant, Lena, had taped a photograph of a forest over the window during a filter failure 18 months ago. The photograph was still there. The forest was green and still and entirely convincing from a distance. We had both stopped noticing it was not real. My title was Compact Liaison, Office of the Mutual Aid Compact. The compact was the thing nobody had predicted, which meant it was the most thoroughly human thing we had ever built. Here is what it was. When the withdrawal filing became public record, 31 delegations contacted us before the ink was dry. Not the senior council members. Not the Velven or the Krethsol or the Myra T senior voices. The ones who contacted us were from the outer tiers and the unrecognized observer seats and the species whose development proposals had been returned the same number of times ours had been. They reached us through personal contacts and indirect message chains and very long encrypted transmissions that had taken unusual routes to arrive. They said, in various languages and communication forms, something that translated to a version of the same basic statement: if you are building something new, we would like to be part of it. Owen had cried at the 3rd message. He denies this. He is wrong. The compact grew to 43 member species in its first 2 years. It had no tier system. It had no provisional membership categories. It had a table, and the table was round, and that had been Clara's idea, and it had turned out to be a better idea than even Clara had initially understood. The first time all 43 delegations sat down together and looked at a table with no head, no designated position of authority, no architectural signal about whose voice carried more weight than anyone else's, the room went to a specific kind of quiet. Not the quiet of a council chamber before a vote. Something different. Something that felt more like a room full of beings looking at a door that had never been opened and understanding, for the first time, that they had a key. It looked like possibility. It looked exactly like that. The Kepler web came online in year 4. That was Ned's project, which meant it was completed 6 months behind schedule and delivered at 3 times the original performance specifications. The Webb was a communications and transit relay network that operated on principles the Council's Physics Review Board had formally classified as theoretically unsound in a report published in 2039. That report had 6 authors. 2 of them subsequently contacted Ned requesting to be credited in the Webb's documentation. Ned had not responded to either message. The Webb reduced transit and communication times across a significant arc of space by a factor of 3. For 43 species who had previously needed to submit access requests to Council relay infrastructure, requests that were processed on an average timeline of 19 months, this was not a convenience. It was a structural change in what daily life looked like. 19 months for a relay request. We kept that number on the office wall. The compact also built a medical exchange in year 3, coordinated by Cora, who had come to Titan from a background in emergency field medicine and who treated every logistical obstacle as a personal insult that she intended to resolve before dinner. The exchange connected medical practitioners and supply chains across all 43 member species in ways that had not previously existed. By year 5, it had resolved 14 health crises that would, under previous conditions, have waited in formal council review queues for years. 14 crises in 2 years. We kept that number on the wall too. By year 6, the seed library program that Lena had started on her own time, without a budget or a mandate, had grown into a full division with 40 dedicated staff members and partnerships across 22 member species. She had never asked for permission to start it. She had just started it. That was a pattern I had come to recognize as distinctly and specifically human in a way that I had never thought to name until I watched our compact partners observe it for the first time. They watched us begin things without authorization and finish them without ceremony, and they were consistently uncertain how to file that observation. The first anomaly report arrived on a Tuesday in year 7. I remember it was a Tuesday because our supply shipments came on Tuesdays and the corridor always carried a faint green smell from Lena's seed library packing materials on those days. A smell I had come to associate with things proceeding in the right direction. The report had been misdirected. It had originated in a Velthan agricultural monitoring station and traveled through a chain of forwards so long and indirect that it had lost its intended destination by the time it reached our office. The subject was a cascading failure in the timing algorithm of the Velthan crop synchronization network. The algorithm had been designed and implemented by a human engineering team contracted through the Council's infrastructure division. That team had left with the withdrawal. The report did not state that directly. It described the failures in technical terms and noted the original design provenance without drawing a line between those two facts. It did not need to draw the line. I read it twice. I set it on the desk. I made a second cup of coffee. Lena watched me do all of this. She had a quality that I had identified in the best people I had worked with over the years, the ability to distinguish between a silence that needed filling and one that needed to be left exactly as it was. I left this one exactly as it was. The week after, 3 more reports arrived. They had not been sent to us intentionally. They were misdirections, forwarded fragments, messages that had been rerouted so many times they had ended up on my desk the way debris ends up on a shore. A water recycling process failure in a Crethsol station. A stalled mediation in the outer territories. A medical supply routing breakdown in a Myra T residential cluster. Each one had, somewhere inside the story of how it had gone wrong, a human handprint. Something we had built. Something we had been maintaining without anyone having formally noted that we were the ones maintaining it. Owen looked at the 4 reports one afternoon and was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "We were the maintenance staff." He did not say it with bitterness. He said it the way you say something that has been true for a long time and that you are only now finding the precise words to describe. The observation had the quality of a key fitting a lock that had been sitting on the table for years. We were the maintenance staff. The people who knew where the gaps were. Who fixed things before they appeared on official reports. Who had been doing it long enough that the senior tiers had simply stopped noticing the work was being done at all. The reports went into a folder. The folder went on the wall panel. The wall panel I had never used before, the one Lena had cleared specifically for this purpose, as though she had known it was coming. I did not open the folder again that year. There were other things to tend. The compact was expanding. The medical exchange was processing its 15th crisis resolution. The seed library was fielding requests from species we had not yet formally met. The round table had scheduled its quarterly open session and the room was going to be full. I had a great deal of work. The folder sat on the wall and I did not open it, and every Tuesday the corridor smelled like green things being carefully packed and shipped to places that needed them. The folder stopped being a folder somewhere around year 9. I had Lena move the reports to a dedicated wall panel after the 23rd arrived. The panel filled in 6 weeks. She ordered a second panel. That one filled faster. The failures were not dramatic, which was the most important thing about them. They were not explosions or wars or the kind of large, visible catastrophe that generates emergency sessions and crisis briefings. They were quiet failures. A system running slightly slower than it should. A mediation process stalled at stage 3 because the assigned arbiter had filed a procedural hold and no one on the council's active roster had the specific cross-species contextual knowledge to take over. A pharmaceutical supply chain failing to adapt to a seasonal variable it had adapted to without incident for 9 straight years, until the human logistics coordinator who had been tracking that variable left the system. Each failure was small. Together, they were a map. Owen stood in front of the second panel one morning with his coffee going cold in his hand. He was reading the failure reports the way you read a document you are trying to convince yourself does not say what it clearly says. His expression was the expression of a man arriving at a conclusion that makes him feel 2 contradictory things at once, the satisfaction of being right, and the specific exhaustion of wishing he had been wrong. They never wrote it down, he said. I looked at him. What we knew. What we were doing. The gap-filling, the informal systems, the things we were running in the background because someone had to and nobody else had noticed they needed running. He gestured at the panel. They never wrote it down because they never had to. We just kept doing it. He was right. In 17 years of council membership, no human contribution to informal infrastructure maintenance had been officially catalogued. Formal proposals, yes. Mediation credits, yes. Treaty participation, documented. But the 10,000 smaller things, the daily adaptive work, the kind of operational knowledge that lives in the hands of the people doing it rather than in any written record, that had never been formalized because it had never needed to be. We had been doing it. We had simply stopped. The panel continued filling. A Velven communications array began dropping packets at irregular intervals because the redundancy protocol it relied on had been written by a human contractor and contained a comment-based override system that no remaining council technician knew how to access. The comment was written in English. Specifically in the particular technical shorthand of a woman named Clara, who was currently designing the second phase of the Kepler web in an office on Ganymede and who, when I forwarded her the failure report, replied in 4 words, "That was always wrong." She sent a patch. She sent it to me. Not to the council. The Myra-T sent a delegation to Titan in month 14 of the second panel. Not the Myra-T senior voices from the council. The Myra-T from our compact. They arrived with a data package and a formal request for a meeting, which they then spent the first 20 minutes of the meeting explaining was not actually a formal request but rather a collegial information sharing session. The data package contained a translated copy of a council internal research document. The document had been classified. The Myra-T did not explain how they had obtained it. They did not need to. The document was an academic analysis produced by the Council's Strategic Studies Division. It was 48 pages long and it examined, with considerable scholarly apparatus and a great many footnotes, something the Velven had apparently been calling internally by a phrase that translated, with various degrees of awkward precision depending on the rendering, as the primate persistence anomaly. I read the full document in one sitting. The Council's Strategic Studies Division had spent 3 years documenting, classifying, and attempting to model a behavioral pattern in human delegations that they had observed consistently across 17 years of membership. The pattern was this: humans continued past the rational stopping point. When a mediation had statistically failed, when a crisis resolution had exceeded its viable window, when a proposal had been returned enough times that any reasonable analysis predicted 0 probability of success, human personnel continued. They adapted mid-process. They improvised with whatever was available. They tried approaches that had no precedent and therefore no documented failure rate. And they achieved outcomes that the Council's formal models had classified as improbable with a frequency that the Strategic Studies Division found statistically difficult to explain. The document's conclusion, stated with the specific careful language of academics who are uncertain how to file what they have found, was that this pattern represented a significant and undervalued operational asset. The document was dated 4 years before the withdrawal. It had been classified. Nobody had told us it existed. Bless their hearts, I said to the empty office. Lena did not ask what I meant. She had been working with me long enough to know that particular phrase meant something that had no polite direct translation. The Velthan subdelegate arrived unannounced on a Thursday morning 6 weeks after the Myra T visit. He was a junior representative, not someone I recognized from council sessions, and he spent the first portion of our conversation explaining that he was in the sector for an entirely unrelated administrative matter and had simply thought it would be courteous to call in. He had brought no documentation. He had no official standing in the conversation. He was, in every observable way, a person making a casual social visit. He was also, very clearly, a person who had been sent to test the temperature of a room before anyone with a title committed to entering it. I offered him the coffee. He could not metabolize coffee. I made a cup and drank it in front of him while he explained, at length and with elaborate indirection, that the council was aware of certain operational challenges in its infrastructure management, and that there had been some internal discussion, very preliminary, purely exploratory, about whether any form of consultative arrangement with human technical specialists might be of mutual benefit. Consultative arrangement. I let that phrase sit in the air between us without commenting on it. He said, mutual benefit, twice more before he ran out of careful language and we were both simply sitting in the room with the actual thing he had come to say, which was, things are going wrong, we know you know why, and we would like to know whether there is any form of conversation we could have about that. I told him I appreciated the visit. I said the compact had a formal external engagement process, and I would be glad to provide him with the submission documentation. He left with a packet of forms that had an average processing time of 4 months. The second wall panel had filled by the time he reached his ship. I ordered a third. They sent 7. 7 delegates from the Galactic Council, arriving at the Titan Compact facility on a formal diplomatic transport, dressed in the full ceremonial designation markings of their respective senior positions. 7 was the Council's number for maximum institutional sincerity. I knew this because I had spent 17 years learning the significance of numbers I was never meant to need to understand. I had asked Owen, Clara, Ned, Lena, and Cora to be present. The 6 of us sat on one side of the round table. The 7 of them sat on the other. There was a moment, just before the formal opening, when the head arbiter Velrath looked at the table and registered, with a slight adjustment of his posture, that there was no head. That the table was round. That the seating arrangement implied nothing about the relative standing of the parties in it. He looked at the table the way a person looks at a room that has been rearranged while they were away, trying to determine whether the rearrangement is accidental or intentional. It was intentional. He chose a seat. I did not comment on which seat he chose. Velrath opened the formal session with a prepared statement. It was long. It had clearly been written by a team and revised multiple times. It used the word regrettable 4 times. It used the phrase, operational challenges, 7 times. It referenced the compact twice, with the specific careful phrasing of a document that has been reviewed for any language that might constitute implicit recognition of a competing authority structure. It never used the word wrong. The Krethsol elder, the one I remembered from the Habitat Rights vote in 2047, sat at the far end of their side of the table and said nothing during the opening statement. He watched me instead. He had the quality of attention of someone who has been briefed very thoroughly and is now checking the briefing against the actual subject. I let Velrath finish. Full silence after. I had learned the value of silence in that chamber 9 years ago. Sure, okay, I said. Velrath paused. His secondary membranes, the ones that served as a supplementary communication system in Velthan interaction, shifted in a pattern I had seen before only in situations where a senior diplomat had received a response that no preparation had covered. Ambassador Solis, he said. The Council wishes to discuss the possibility of a renewed engagement framework that would allow human expertise to contribute to Council operational stability while respecting the current independent status of. What specific functions does the Council require? I said. He stopped. I understand the statement, I said. I would like to move to specifics. Which systems, which operational areas, and on what timeline? Owen, to my left, was looking at his water glass with great attention. Lena's expression had not changed. She was very good at that. Velrath consulted with the delegate to his right for a moment. Then he began a list. The list was long. I listened to all of it. I did not take notes, because Lena was taking notes, which was her job and which she was better at than anyone I had ever worked with. I listened and I asked clarifying questions, and I did not, at any point during the list, indicate that I had already known most of what was on it. The 3 wall panels in the back office were not decoration. When the list was complete, I asked about authority structure. Specifically, in any renewed engagement, under whose jurisdiction would human personnel be operating? Velrath said the Council's. I said, under the compacts. He said that human personnel operating within Council infrastructure would naturally fall under standard Council operational authority as per existing charter provisions. I said, the existing charter provisions applied to member species operating under provisional status in Tier 7. We are not member species. We are not operating under provisional status. And there is no Tier 7 at this table. The Mirati delegate, who had been shifting through a range of colors throughout the session, settled on a specific shade of deep gold. In Mirati communication, I knew from 3 years of working alongside compact Mirati partners, deep gold indicated a response somewhere between being impressed and being uncomfortable about being impressed. Velrath said that the Council understood the compact's position but would need to review any authority framework with its legal advisory panel before committing to language. I said that was fine and suggested we schedule a follow-up in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Not 6 months. Not a 4-committee review cycle. 6 weeks, which was the compact's standard timeline for preliminary framework reviews, and which I had just applied to the Galactic Council the way you apply any standard to any party sitting across from you at a round table. The room processed that. The Krethsol elder spoke for the first time. His translator rendered the words with the particular smoothing that translation systems applied to direct statements, and still the directness came through. He said that the Council had come to this meeting in good faith and with a genuine desire for resolution, and that humanity's contributions during its membership had been valued even when that value had not been fully articulated. Not fully articulated. I looked at him. Your species was always most effective, he said, within the structure we provided. The room temperature did not change. Owen's hand was very still on the table. Lena's pen had stopped moving. I looked at the Krethsol elder for a long moment. He had a quality of certainty that was specific to beings who had never had to question the frame they operated within because the frame had always worked in their favor. I had seen that quality many times. I knew exactly what it looked like. Bless your heart, I said. The translator processed this. The Mirati delegate turned a color for which I did not have a reference point. I mean that, I said, in the warmest possible terms. I did not clarify further. I let it sit in the room exactly where I had put it. Shall we move to the timeline for our follow-up session? We scheduled the follow-up. Velrath attempted, twice more during the closing formalities, to return to the question of authority structure. I noted both attempts and redirected both times to logistical scheduling, which is the diplomatic equivalent of changing a channel on a device you control and your guest does not. They left 2 hours after they arrived. They had come expecting a homecoming. A return of the prodigal species, grateful and ready to resume the familiar shape of things. They had received a calendar invite. I stood at the window after their transport cleared the docking bay. The forest photograph looked back at me. Third follow-up in 6 weeks, Lena said, not looking up from her notes. That's the third delegation in 8 months. The fourth is probably already being assembled, I said. She nodded. Should I start preparing the rate documentation? I looked at the forest photograph for a moment. Yes, I said. I went to make coffee. The document was 11 pages. The Council had sent a 14-person advance team expecting to spend 3 weeks in pre-negotiation review. 11 pages took an advance team approximately 45 minutes to read. I know because I was watching through the glass of the conference room when they finished, and the particular stillness that descended on 14 experienced diplomatic professionals after 45 minutes of reading was one of the most informative things I had observed in 9 years of post-withdrawal work. Velrath arrived the following morning. This time it was not 7 delegates. It was 11, which was the council's number for a negotiation they considered existential to their institutional interests. I knew this because I had spent 17 years learning numbers I was never meant to need to understand. Owen sat to my left again. Clara and Ned were at the table. Lena had brought a second notepad, which was her quiet signal that she expected this to go long. Cora was there as well, because the medical exchange provisions were in the document and she had written them, and she had opinions about how they would be discussed that I had learned not to stand between her and a chance to express. I had also invited 2 compact delegates. The Myra T. senior voice, who communicated in color shift and who had been working alongside us for 4 years. And the Vel-then representative from our own compact membership, a detail that had required some quiet logistical management on the seating side of things, and that I noted Velrath registering with a very controlled expression when he took his seat. The compact Vel-then representative nodded to Velrath. Velrath nodded back. No one commented on this. I opened the session by inviting the council to raise its initial questions on the document. Not objections. Questions. The distinction was deliberate and I had chosen the word in front of Lena 3 times while preparing, which was my method for making sure I would use it correctly under pressure. The council's advance team had flagged 17 sections. I had expected 20. The first 11 were technical. Scope of service, delivery timelines, performance benchmarks, personnel classifications. These were resolved in the first 2 hours because they were the sections that read like a contract, which was what they were, and the council's advisors were experienced with contracts. The fact that a contract of this type, between a non-member human body and the council, had no existing precedent was something everyone in the room was aware of and that no one brought up directly for the first 2 hours. Then we reached Section 7. Section 7 was the pricing structure. The council's lead legal advisor, a Vel-then senior voice named Aerith who had been in diplomatic practice for longer than humanity had been in space, looked at Section 7 with the expression of someone reading a document they understand perfectly and wish they did not. The council has significant concerns, Aerith said, about the commercialization framework as applied to knowledge and technical contributions that have historically been exchanged within a shared institutional context. I said, the knowledge and technical contributions referenced in Section 7 were produced by human personnel, maintained by human personnel, and withdrawn with human personnel at the time of the voluntary dissolution. They have no existing institutional context. They are human assets, and Section 7 describes the terms on which they are available. The spirit of the original membership arrangement. The spirit of the original membership arrangement placed us in Tier 7 for 17 years, I said. The room held that. Aerith was experienced enough not to respond immediately to a statement that was not technically a question. He looked at the document. He looked at me. He looked at the document again. The council is not disputing the validity of the compact's independent status, he said finally. The council is suggesting that a pricing framework of this scale represents a significant departure from the cooperative principles that have governed interspecies exchange within council jurisdiction. Owen said, very quietly, we're not within council jurisdiction. He said it the way you state a fact about the weather. No heat in it at all. Aerith absorbed this. A revised framework, he said. Something that acknowledges the historical context of the relationship while establishing new terms. The document is the revised framework, I said. The first framework was 17 years of contributions without a rate card. Section 7 is the revision. Ned was looking at his notepad. Clara was looking at her water glass. Cora was looking directly at Aerith with the specific patient expression she reserved for situations where she had information that would eventually be recognized as correct and was willing to wait for that recognition. The council asked for a recess. We took 40 minutes. The council team moved to the secondary conference room. I stood at the corridor window with Owen. He said, they're going to push back on the audit clause. I know. They'll accept everything else if we modify the audit clause. I know. Are we modifying the audit clause? I thought about the 3 wall panels. The 19 months for a relay request. The document classified 4 years before the withdrawal. The phrase that translated as primate persistence anomaly. The 17 years of work that had gone into a formal record as 3 partial adoptions and a set of commemorative data chips. No, I said. Owen nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The compact Velthan delegate." Velrath looked at him 3 times during the Section 5 discussion. I noticed. That was deliberate. Of course it was. He smiled. Not a large smile. The kind of smile that is mostly exhaled breath. We went back to the table. The audit clause stayed in. The session lasted 8 hours. By hour 5, we had moved through the contested sections and were working through implementation logistics. By hour 6, the Myra T. senior voice had contributed twice, both times with observations that moved the conversation forward in ways that were difficult to redirect, and both times with the particular quality of a delegate who has been underestimated by the other side and finds this professionally useful. By hour 7, the Krethsol elder, who had been in the chamber since morning, said something that I had not anticipated. He said, "Ambassador Solis, I voted against the habitat rights motion in 2047. The table went quiet. I looked at him. "I want that acknowledged," he said. "Before this document is signed. I want the record to note that I voted against it, and that my reasoning at the time was that provisional membership species did not have standing to claim habitat rights under the Charter as written." He was quiet for a moment. The Charter was written by founding member species. I was a founding member species representative. He did not say he was sorry. That was not, I understood from years of cross-species diplomatic work, a concept that translated cleanly in Krethsol communication. But he had said the true thing. He had said it in a room full of witnesses. I looked at him for a long moment. "Acknowledged," I said. He nodded once. He looked down at his copy of the document. He turned to the signature page. The document was signed at 9:06 in the evening. Owen signed for the compact. Velrath signed for the council. The compact Velthan representative and the Myra T. senior voice signed as witnesses. Lena had the copies organized and distributed before anyone had fully processed that it was over. The advance team left first. Then the secondary delegates. Velrath paused at the door and turned back. He looked at me with an expression that I did not have an easy classification for. Not gratitude. Not quite respect. Something more complicated. Something that acknowledged a long distance traveled and did not pretend the distance had been comfortable. He said, "You waited." I said, "We had other things to build." He left. The room was ours again. Owen and Clara and Ned and Lena and Cora, and the empty round table, and the stack of signed documents, and the specific quality of quiet that follows the end of something that took a long time. Cora opened a bottle of something she had been keeping in her office for what she called a sufficiently historic occasion. She poured 6 glasses without asking. We each took one. Nobody gave a speech. The document covered everything. The pricing structure for all human technical consultation and infrastructure services. The authority framework, compact jurisdiction with council administrative cooperation protocols. The personnel terms, full diplomatic equivalency, no provisional categories, no tier assignments. The mutual aid compact's independent status, recognized in the document's preamble with language the council's legal team had spent 4 hours trying to soften and had eventually left exactly as we had written it. And the last item in Section 9, the one Aerith had read 3 times during the session and not raised once, because there was no argument for removing it that did not also function as a full admission of everything that had come before. All human contributions to council infrastructure, from the original membership date forward, catalogued, credited, and formally entered into the institutional record. Not as gifts. Not as cooperative gestures made in the spirit of shared interspecies progress. As work. Done by people. Who had done it, and kept doing it, and whose names had not appeared in a single official record while they were doing it. Now they would. I stayed in the office after the others had gone. Lena had offered to stay and I had told her to go home, and after a moment she had accepted this, which meant she trusted my judgment, which was the thing I valued most about her. The room was quiet. I stood at the window and looked at the photograph of the forest. The filters were working tonight. Through the photograph, through the gap at its left edge where the tape had come loose, I could see the actual amber haze of Titan, real and low and permanent. 2 images, 1 window. I took the data chip out of my pocket. I had been carrying it for 9 years. In the pocket of every jacket, every formal coat, every travel bag. It had the weight of something that is very light but that you notice every time you reach past it. The council had issued one to every human delegate at the membership ceremony in 2041. There had been speeches and a live feed and a great deal of sincere emotion, and then we had been placed in Tier 7 with our commemorative chips and our provisional status and our 47 development proposals. I held it in my palm. It was small. The kind of small that is easy to overlook. I thought about the round table. The 43 species. The Kepler web and the medical exchange and the seed library that had grown from one person's decision to simply start a thing without waiting to be told she was allowed. I thought about Owen casting our vote with steady hands. About Clara's patch, sent in 4 words to me and not to the council. About Cora's bottle and 6 glasses and no speeches. I thought about the wall panels. I thought about the Crethsole elder saying the true thing in front of witnesses. I thought about my mother, who had watched humanity grovel for 17 years, who had cried at the admission ceremony and watched us sit in Tier 7 and never once told me to stop trying. She had asked how Titan was. 3 words, sent 8 months into the negotiations, timed with the accuracy of someone who knew exactly when her daughter would need to hear from her. I had written back. Cold. Productive. The coffee is still bad. She had replied, good. That means you're working. I opened the desk drawer. I set the data chip inside it. I did not keep it on my person. I did not throw it away. I put it in a drawer, in an office, on a moon, next to a forest photograph that was not real and a window that showed the real thing just at the edge. Some things you carry until the carrying has done what it needed to do. Then you set them down. Lena came in the next morning with a new report. She set it on the desk without comment and went to make the coffee. The report was from the Council's Operational Review Board. First submission under the new framework. A relay timing issue in a mid-belt communications cluster. Human technical consultation requested, priority level 2, within the 14-day response window specified in Section 4. I opened the rate card. I found the relevant service category. I noted the applicable pricing tier. I filled in the response form with the clean, practiced motion of a person doing the work they're very good at and are now, finally, being paid correctly to do. The window filter was failing again. The forest looked back at me, steady and green and entirely convincing. Lena set a cup on the desk. It was good coffee. I picked up the next report. We had a great deal of work ahead. We had always been the ones who showed up and did it. The difference now was the invoice. We sent every one,